Dímelo.
Buenos días, buenos días. Buenos días, buenos días. Buenos días.
Buenos días, manito.
Buenos días, buenos días.
Buenos días, chicos.
Buen día, buen día.
Buenos días. Buenos días, buenos días.
¿Qué dices? ¿Qué dices?
Muy bien, muy bien. Vamos a ver qué tenemos.
Dímelo, estoy bien.
Oh,
Eso.
bro. Pushing up gold. Vamos a tener que esperar un poquito de volumen. Que el precio vaya, rompa áreas. Se mueva a lugares. Bastante volumen, ¿no? Bastante volumen el gol.
Buenos días.
Buenos días, buenos días.
Y ahora estaba ahí como que vendan conmigo.
Sí, parecía una venta ahora. Es verdad.
Incautos.
Sí, es verdad.
Vendan.
Sí, es verdad, sí, es verdad. Es verdad, parecía, pero no.
Eso es lo importante de entrar en el bajo más bajo.
Sí, es verdad. Sí, vamos a tener que esperar poquitín de volumen. GBP-JPY puede ser interesante. Vamos a ver cómo va a cerrar en 30 minutos.
Sí, esa área en 30 se ve bien. Hay que esperar.
Please stand up, please stand up. Oro como que quiere rechazar esa área del volumen, pero parece que no.
Sí. 50 pips subió ahí.
Oro bandido, bandido, bandido.
Pero ya casi por la mitad. Huele a rechazo, huele a confirmación, no sabemos por qué es el otro.
Si mantiene rechazando es bueno.
Pero con el orito nunca se sabe.
Sería divertido ver GBP USD, las ventas. Sí, sería divertido ver GBP USD, continuación de ventas. Una hora se ve chévere en GBP USD. Muy interesting.
Viene GJ.
GJ.
Si viene. Podría ser interesante.
Se lo ve bonito, se lo ve bonito. Ahí va.
Muy bien, estoy vendiendo. Veamos. Empieza a regresar de esa manera. Probablemente elimino órdenes. Sí, ahora mismo eliminé mi orden y voy a esperar nuevamente por el bajo. Espero por el bajo. Se regresó ahí. 6 pips alrededor. Voy a esperar por el bajo. Es decir, voy a dejar un sell stop allí. Sell stop por ahí. En el bajo. Vamos a ver, 9, 1, 5. Up, down, punto up. Se regresó. Vamos a regresar 8 pips. Pero bueno, si se mantiene de esa manera, está bien. Jackson, Mississippi. Estas tablas son 12. Estas acá son 36. Ahí vamos. Nuevamente. Nuevamente, segunda oportunidad. Segunda oportunidad al escenario. Veamos. Up, down, punto up. Up, down, punto up. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Siete minutos alrededor para el cierre de vela, pero si esta velita de 5 minutos en 2 minutos se mantiene bajista, nos vende información. Ahora mismo estoy pensando en la configuración que existe en 15 minutos basado en volumen. Así que bueno, paciencia por ahora. Paciencia, paciencia, paciencia. Cargueche.
Lo estás haciendo bien.
Veamos.
Haciendo bien.
Muy bien. Muy bien. Muy bien. Muy bien, muy bien, muy bien. Stop loss a precio de entrada. Va a cerrar velita de temporalidad menor. Veamos. Una hora se ve muy bien. Se ve muy bien una hora para continuar avanzando allí. Nada mal, nada mal. Ajá, muy bien. Tres minutitos. Nuestra vela de J. 5 minutos cerró bien. Toma de liquidez probablemente será lo ideal, que esto sea la toma de liquidez para continuar movimientos. Oro siguió arriba. Wow. Oro siguió up. Aquí vamos. 13 pips.
Eu también me lo parece.
13 pips. Si alguien desea ir tomando un poco de beneficios en sentido de recuperar profits, no es una mala idea. No es nada descabellado. Muy bien. Wow.
Es un soportito de 15 minutos.
Ajá, sí, el área. El área. Rayos. Sí, se veía muy bien GPJPY. Wow.
Se devolvió, wow.
Se devolvió. Alcanzó a tomar poquitín de beneficios para recuperar.
No me dejó agarrarle. Se regresó enseguida.
Sí, se regresó inmediato. Empujó un poquitín. Parecía que iba a continuar movimiento fuerte. Pero se regresó. Sin embargo, de querer hacer el movimiento o poder hacerlo, pues sí puede, claro que sí. Sí puede hacerlo. La cuestión es el movimiento, ese break even. oro siguió empujando fuerte. Fuerte, fuerte, fuerte. GPUSD se quedó allá. Oro quiso seguir empujando. Ush, sabe la de oro, 15 minutos, wow. Wow, 15 minutos. PJPY. Puede seguir el movimiento. Puede seguir el movimiento.
Miren ahora cómo subió.
Wow. Fuerte, fuerte ese gold. Fuerte, fuerte, fuerte.
Placía vender, placía. Digo, comprar. Placía comprar.
Fuerte gold. Gold, 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 gold.
Oro durito, durito ahí.
Sí, 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 va fuerte, volumen fuerte, bro.
Tiene una área bastante a la izquierda, ¿verdad? Ahí, más o menos atrás.
Ush. Ese oro. Fuertecito, fuertecito oro. GG se regresó un poquitín.
Yo todavía estoy en pérdida hoy. Bueno, intenté tomar unas ventas al principio en GPUSD que no se dieron. Pues bueno,
Uy, es que GPU ha estado horrible.
Y GJ me sacó break-even. Entonces, bueno, por estar aguantando. Nada que hacer.
Sí, hay que esperar. Dice, el broker de raya se frizó por 30 minutos y muchos tuvieron pérdidas porque cuando regresó no respetó los stop loss. Qué triste. Digo, referente a la calculadora. ¿Cuál calculadora? Oro podría romper, ya rompió. Vi tarde. Leí tarde. Ya rompió oro. Yo creo que GPUS una hora se ve muy bien. Creo que debajo de estas áreas vale la pena esperar a GPUS saliendo de ese rango y regresando a esta área de volumen.
Yo lo tengo marcado en 1.22354. Por ahí lo veo interesante.
Ah, en esta área.
Ahí mismo.
Ajá, sí. Sí, está bien también. Sí. También, a partir de ahí puede empezar a moverse. Attention, please. Get ready. Attention, please. So everybody, just follow me. So everybody, just follow me, cause I feel so empty without me. Without me. So everybody, just follow me, cause we need controversy, cause I feel so empty without me. Ay no, que como la voy a llamar. Chotonto 3-3.
La que queda hacer un pick out de oro
No.
en 15.
¿Quién se queda en error?
Pareciera que quisiera hacer un pick out en 15.
¿Oro?
Sí.
Es verdad. Without me. Just follow me. No, this looks like a job for me. This looks like a. La, 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 la. La la la. Come.
No. Pero... ¿Por qué?
Ay. Ay, no. Turun, 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 turun. Turun, 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 turun. Dice... Qué bueno, pasé mi primer challenge, solo espero los credenciales de la FONDEADA. Muy bueno, muy bueno, muy bueno, qué bueno, muy buen trabajo. Buen trabajo con ese challenge.
Yo voy 3.72%.
Oh, qué buena. Oh, GPJPY, que horas tenemos las 8. Muy bien, vamos a ver.
3.59 y trabajo todo un montón de 30.
Quería tomar una venta en juego que está pedido de todos.
Puede ser, sí. Faltan 3 minutos.
3.70.
3 minutos para cierre de velita, puede ser.
Sí.
The forehand. Van a cerrar velitas de 1 hora y 4 horas. 4 horas va a cerrar GBP-USD, GBP-JPY. Interesante, 1 hora va a cerrar. Va a cerrar hacia abajo 1 hora.
Bolsa vela de oro de 4 horas.
Oh, wow. Súper interesante
Sí.
también. Vamos a prestarle atención si toma un poquito de liquidez. Oro, me gusta, tiene volumen oro. Si oro muestra liquidez, se ve nice. GBP-USD puede seguir cayendo, definitivamente. Puede seguir haciendo su movimiento. Y oro sería divertido si vemos una toma de liquidez en 30 minutos.
¿Alguien sabe
Puede
qué dijo
ser.
Powell o va a hablar ahora?
¿Cuándo? Powell, no. Creo que no. ¿Hoy qué es? ¿Hoy es miércoles?
Yes, miércoles. Ahí lo tienes. Fed Chair Powell testifies.
Rayos. ¿Quién sabe acerca de qué hablará?
Mira cómo de pronto oro puede tomar liquidez.
Ahí está la toma de liquidez. Si oro empieza a recuperarse.
GG está bonito también, la verdad. Pero el oro me gusta más.
Si oro empieza a recuperarse. Sí, la verdad, sí, oro está divertido. Vamos a ver. Love again. Y es que a la izquierda se ve bello en 30 minutos. Bajito, bajito, 30, 40 pips. Puede moverse oro tranqui. GBP, JPY sea interesante, sí es verdad. GBP parece querer romper. Vamos a ver. Además de que puede ser algo en una hora, igualmente toma de liquidez en una hora. La cuestión es verlo allá arriba. Y listo, vamos a ver si oro se recupera, sería divertido. La verdad es que sí, sí sería divertido. Hello.
El PVC ahí está ya haciendo un alto más alto.
Ah, sí, las libras están subiendo un poquitín, sí es cierto. Vamos a ver qué pasa esta siguiente media horita. Puede ser, sí, sí, GBPUSD. Llenar estas mechas, ¿será? Puede ser. Oh, ahí va GBPUSD, sí señores.
Oye, bro, una pregunta, ¿dónde puedo descargar el simulador?
Déjame tu correo para hacértelo llegar.
Va, ahorita te lo mando.
Dale, dale, dale. Dale, dale, dale. Nuestro gol que no nos va a perder. Vamos a ver esa toma de liquidez. Es una toma de liquidez profunda. ¿Qué onda? Estar atentos allí a las novedades.
Listo, bro, ya te lo mandé por el chat. O te lo mando por WhatsApp.
Por WhatsApp, amigo.
Va.
Una vela que cerró por debajo, en oro en 5, quién sabe.
Vamos a ver. PJP ya también se regresó.
Hoy en 20.550. El petróleo también está bajando muchísimo, ¿no?
El petróleo.
Sí, estaba en 100, como en 120 por ahí. Ah, que estoy bien.
El Mac tiene buenas experiencias con el petróleo.
Sí,
Ah, sí. Cuéntame. Esa no me la sabía.
sí. Pero el petróleo.
¿Operaste el petróleo?
Sí.
Vaya, vaya.
El US Oil.
Qué cosas de las que uno se entera.
Sí.
¿Y qué tal te trató el petróleo?
Bien, me salí antes de que me tratara mal.
Qué bueno.
Antes de que se volviera una relación tóxica.
No.
Porque es que él da movimientos bastante así, como que impulsos bastante grandes, ¿no? Es como el oro.
Dios pasa, Dios.
Estamos hablando del petróleo. Del oro negro.
Y es un bajo más bajo en 5.
Puede que tarde, entonces. Vamos a ver
Dios pasa,
a las,
Dios.
a las 8:30, a ver qué pasa. Se puede tardar.
Emma,
Sí.
Emma Winder. Emma, te mandé un chat al IGE al Instagram, por ahí que lo chequeas luego cuando tengas tiempo. Por ahí que es importante sobre los bitcoins y eso.
¿Eso qué es? ¿CUPON? A ver. ¿Cómo creció esa chica tanto en Instagram? Wow.
Sí, dicen que es muy buena, ¿no? Mariel.
No me consta, pero pues ha crecido mucho. Tiene buen contenido.
La Mariela.
Mariela, no sé qué fue. Ajá, ella, Mariela Ángel, algo así. Ángel, algo así.
El PVCD ahí está bonito, pero es que está ya entraría en rango, la verdad. O sea,
Sí, no. Es un rango
la
muy
configuración está bonita, pero ves a la izquierda y
grande. Exacto, el mejor área es por encima.
exacto.
Ay, la embarré. Señor. Creo que era el de... ¿Quién durante este año que tenga criptomonedas ha hecho dinero con criptomonedas? Pues creo que a menos de que sea trading, no.
Se ha perdido. Ujú.
Este año no. Yo he perdido un montón.
Más fuerte.
Hola tíos, estoy en Wall Street.
Cuidado con el lobo.
Maldito.
Ese Johnny Negro. Cuando el mercado está feo.
En un día de pérdida solo tienen que pensar, hola tíos, en Wall Street. Tienen que pensar nada más. Solo eso.
Oh, sí, el peso colombiano 4022.
El dólar.
Sí.
Cool.
Lo necesito en... Lo necesito en unos... Lo necesito en unos...
5.
4010, 4010, 4020.
Isabela.
Oh, ¿qué es eso?
Chicos. Sí, parece que sí.
No, yo creo que yo me quedo con esto. La verdad es que el mercado hoy me trata un poco mal, entonces mejor vuelvo mañana.
Calma la vida con calma, sí, está aburrido.
Ujú.
Pura
Cuídense,
vida.
muchachos, nos vemos mañana.
Dale, mi hermano.
brother.
Métele.
Chao, chao.
Cuídate, hermano. Yo lo necesito por ahí en 4500. Eso no es descabellado, 4500. El alto fue 4200. Casi los 4300.
Otra casa, hermano. Otra casa te vas a comprar.
La verdad sí.
Te estoy oliendo. Te estoy oliendo.
La verdad sí, dame 2 mesecitos. 2 mesecitos.
La casita.
Está bien.
Además, el oro ahí como haciendo fake out, sería posible.
Cerró por debajo.
Under. Yes.
Hay que ver qué pasa en la bala 30. Podría regresar ahí.
Y la verdad de 30 tiene mucha duda.
Enfocarme
Esa área de la izquierda.
en esa
¿no?
área de... Esa área de 30.
Yo creo que es bien 15 por ahí. Bajamos.
¿Cómo está el clima allá en el Wall Street, Holiday?
Cualquier de 30 mejor.
Está bueno el clima allá.
¡Ay! No. Pise los audífonos, güey. ¿Qué dice la people? La people. Oh, oro. Oro parece que sí, oro parece que no. No sabemos. ¿Y qué dice Johnny Naylor?
Aquí en Wall Street, tío.
Yo me voy para... Yo estoy conmigo mismo.
Uy, tío.
En el metaverso.
¿Qué ha pasado, tío? Eso está muy extraño.
Metaverso. Él está en todos los lados, en todos los lugares.
Tío, está esperando por ti.
¿Qué pasa, manito? ¿Has comprado maná?
¿Qué dijiste? ¿Qué ha pasado, tío? Está esperando por ti.
Esa es su habitación en el metaverso.
Yo estoy
Está
conmigo.
esperando por ti.
Eso está raro.
Uy, tío, estás en la playa.
Está en Punta Cana.
En RD.
Sí.
Estoy en RD.
Ah, sí.
Uy. tienen en 15 como está el oro.
Está en el patio de mi casa.
Estoy en RD. Tiene que ser
En la playa, tío.
Ey, hay brisa ahí.
Sí.
¿Esos con movimientos son del Zoom o descargados también?
¿Eso es que Generator?
Esos son los con movimientos.
Sí, eso está en el Zoom.
Sí. Mm,
Me quedaron quietos todas las libras. Libra dólar.
Sí.
No sé nada. O sea, no se mueven tan fuerte.
Yo quiero un dólar, un 4.500. En 4.500 el dólar. No está lejano y no es descabellado. Ya lo hemos visto en 4.200.
Mira lo de 15. Lo que acaba de hacer. Que no fue tan fuerte, pero.
Ah, sí, ahí va. Creo resistencia por ahí. El problema es sacar este soporte a ver qué hace, pero se lo puede echar a la muela. El soporte. Está bueno. Uy, cochones. Este estaba fuerte.
Y minutos para que quieres saberlo. Esta regi se ve como mejor, ¿no?
¿Qué Generator?
Ahora sí se ve como mejor en 30.
Sí, un poquito. Eso.
Literal. Literalmente no literal.
Ahí está abajo como que I'll be waiting for you.
¿Se imagina esa acción? Uy. No,
Mira,
no.
ahí quedó.
Y se queda mirándolo a los ojos, güey. A los ojos. Lo mira a los ojos, güey. Vea, lo mira a los ojos. Contacto visual.
Era la mascota.
Se le ve el sudor.
No. Pobre man, weón.
Tú nada más te vas.
Pobrecito, pobrecito.
Y que calculando a ver si saltando.
Ay. Pues leamos con qué nos encontramos. A ver. Dice, Moscú y la OTAN podrían estar a punto de chocar por el enclave europeo de Rusia y Kaliningrado. Putin se reunirá con líderes del bloque de países que no han condenado su invasión de Ucrania. Inflación de Reino Unido alcanza un nuevo máximo de 40 años del 9.1%. Mayor fabricante de camiones del mundo dice que se enfrenta a una enorme presión en la cadena de suministro. Demanda de hipotecas de tasa ajustable aumenta. Bitcoin podría caer aún más a un mínimo de 13.000. Yo digo que sí. La pregunta con Bitcoin no es ¿caerá Bitcoin? Sino la pregunta es ¿por qué subiría Bitcoin? ¿Cómo por qué?
Exacto. La pregunta adecuada sería esa. No comprar cada vez que va.
La pregunta es esa, ¿cómo por qué? ¿Cómo por qué subiría Bitcoin?
Lindo se siente en la Matrix, ¿no? Desaparece y aparece.
Qué chimba estar acá en Wall Street.
Qué chimbazo. La pregunta es, ¿por qué subiría Bitcoin? What the hell? What the hell Bitcoin going up? What the hell Bitcoin
hoy nos compró.
What the hell Bitcoin pushing up?
Ya subió.
Bitcoin podría caer aún más a un mínimo de 13.000. Vamos a hacerle magia a este artículo. Vamos a hacerle magia. Vamos a hacerle magia. Pero... Bueno, ya no dicen que a 13.000, dicen que podría caer a 0. ¿Qué opinan al respecto?
Oh.
No va a ser, no.
Bitcoin podría caer aún más a un mínimo de 0, advierte una estratega.
0.
Vamos a subir esto a Instagram. Vamos a subir esto a Instagram para que los que tienen Bitcoin se les dé un paro cardíaco.
Para crear como...
Para que empiecen a comentar. Uy, tío, cerró la vela.
¿De cuánto?
De oro. De 15 y de 30.
De 30.
Vaya, tío.
Sí, César. Bitcoin a 0. ¿Cómo la hago, papá? Bitcoin en 0. Como Rubén Blake. Bueno, Bitcoin podría llegar a 0. Se le vio el
Oh, marica, se hizo el bajo más bajo.
Oh.
Pero no. No dio tiempo.
Muy rápida, muy rápida.
Fast.
Yo que esperaba que tomara liquidez cuando.
Tiene la salsa como Rubén Blake.
Paila. Ahí se cayó ya 30 pips.
Vamos a asustar a la gente, Hay gente
bueno,
que
llegó
está
una nueva área del oro.
El oro se fue.
Llegó una nueva área.
Muy bien. Eso es. Bonito
Cayó
fake.
40 pips.
Bonito fake out. Nice fake out. Nice work. Gold. Nice work. rechazo fuerte, 4 horas. Bonito trabajo. Lo triste es que probablemente alguien compró por acá. Todo esto le dieron meter compras por FOMO.
Sí, alguien compró Bitcoin en 69.000 también.
Ah, rayos. Ese fui yo.
Está esperando que suba.
Sí. Muy triste. Muy triste, muy triste. Muy triste, ese sí es triste. Ese sí es triste. Y no es que dicen que puede llegar a cero, mira. Y que Bitcoin puede llegar a cero.
Yo conocí Bitcoin cuando costaba $200.
Ush.
Por un profesor mío de informática que decía que eso era la revolución y lo llamábamos loco.
Cuando
De
estabas,
repente un día desapareció.
cuando estabas en qué estabas cursando.
Cuando era un niño como tú.
Ah, uy, hace harto.
Cuando era un jovenzuelo como tú.
Uy, claro, hace
Yo tendría...
décadas.
Hablamos del 2012, 2013.
Y en ese año yo no había nacido ni siquiera.
No es real. Este hombre usaba los servidores de la universidad para minar Bitcoin, brother. Estaba abajo, decía, ¿esto qué hace ahí abajo? No, como un montón de computadoras, no sé qué, monedas digitales. Digo, ¿en serio?
Ese sí fue un
Vamos a
visionario.
verlo. Un día desapareció. Cuando Bitcoin hizo su primer máximo de 17.000, desapareció.
¿Qué pasa?
Voló.
Debe estar en el Kamehauser.
La última noticia creo que andaba por Tailandia o Vietnam o no sé qué país. Se había comprado una casa ahí. Esa fue la última. Buena gente, Angelito. Si me está viendo.
Se lo merece.
Saludos.
Se lo merece. Un buen tipo, sabio, inteligente y astuto.
Sí. Usaba los servidores de la universidad para minar Bitcoin, el desgraciado, gonorreico, maldito.
Ah, estabas en la universidad, tú. Wow, en 2012.
Primer año. 2014, 13. Primer año.
¿Qué estudiaste?
Administración y dirección de empresas.
Wow. ¿Te graduaste? ¿Terminaste?
Me falta hacer el trabajo de fin de grado.
O sea, no.
Medio flojera. No, porque al final me contrataron en una empresa para trabajar de eso mismo, si el título ya me queda ahí.
¿Y qué pasó?
Que medio flojera.
O sea, ¿qué pasó con la empresa?
Pude dejarla, estar aquí jugando al COD mientras hablo con ustedes.
¿Jugando al COD?
Yo estoy jugando al COD.
¿Ya tienes nivel o qué?
Ush. Bueno, me defiendo. No, ese primer día fue horrible, hermano. Mucho malo ahí.
Hace rato no juego COD desde la última vez que jugamos acá.
Lleva rato que no juegas, ¿eh? Yo sigo subiendo de nivel poco a poco.
Eso es.
Hay que jugar ahorita.
Eso es. Es que los totas son muy duro, pero muy duro en COD.
No, pues qué pena, ¿no? Qué pena.
No, es que son muy malos, güey.
Ay, disculpa.
Son muy malos.
No, es que en ese juego sí yo juego mucho, güey.
Mucho vicio.
Sí, juego
mucho pomo.
Muchísimo.
Estaba tratando de aprender a jugar desde PC, pero no, es muy difícil. No me acostumbro.
No es para todos como el trading. Ya empezaron a pronunciarse.
No tienes actitud, hermano. Te falta mentalidad.
Ya empezaron a pronunciarse por el Bitcoin en cero.
¿Empezaron? No digo. ¿Qué la puesto en stories?
Sí.
¿Qué dicen? Mira.
En serio. Muy fuerte.
A
muy
Emanuel le
fuerte.
gusta ver arder el mundo, pero no arder en él.
No, mi mundo ya ha ardido muchas veces, ya que ardan los de los demás.
Está acostumbrado ya. Se cura en salud.
Sí.
Que los demás, que los demás también ardan un poquito.
Sí.
Claro, que sientan un poco, que se sienten. Aprendan.
Con mi mente ya han jugado muchísimo, ya no me las creo. ¿Qué opinas tú? Me dice Camilo. Está fuerte.
Dile, opino que deberías comprar Tether y quedarte ahí con eso.
No sé.
No sé.
Imagínate tú. Imagínate. Sí, qué piedra. Ay, marica. Mucha güey. Mucha güey. No, bueno, creo que este mercado se va a poner bueno por allá en 1 hora y media, 2 horas.
O termina de dar Powell.
1 hora y media, 2 horas. Mira, GPUC está subiendo, pero más aburrido. Ay, GJ le valió 3 hectáreas esa área, hizo fake out a esa área.
Sí. La macha de oro preciosa también.
Pecado para acá, pecado para allá.
Acá, para allá, para allá, para acá.
A ver, Game Loop.
Están bailando mambo.
Game Loop. No juego hace tanto COD que debe estar inclusive desactualizado. No sé si me lo dejé abrir.
¿Otra vez?
Otra vez.
Uy.
Es que les doy muy duro en ese juego.
No deja jugar el maldito este. Más pesado que un collar de sandía.
Madre, que veo muy duro.
Me está costando una casita yo ahorita, ¿no?
¿Cómo?
¿Qué te cuesta una casa?
Depende. ¿Cómo la quieres? ¿Qué área?
¿Tú ahorita que estás viviendo en ciudad o en campito?
Uy,
Así,
espera que me empecé a desaparecer. Espera.
Tsunami.
Espera que me empecé a desaparecer.
Te llevo la corriente.
Como un güey.
Ah, ya. Me estaba asustando, no me sentía. ¿Será que estoy acá o no estoy acá?
Es tu aura. Era el aura. ¿No?
Yo vivo en ciudad, lamentablemente.
Un depa.
Lamentablemente.
Yo quiero una casita en las afueras.
¿En las afueras de dónde?
De donde mierda sea, pero no me gusta la ciudad. Porque me imagino que lo más caro será ahorita Bogotá y Cali.
No, depende. Depende. O sea, en cuanto a...
Parce, ahora sí como que va a impulsar a la...
Goldie.
En cuanto a propiedades se trata, pues son muchos aspectos. No se puede definir.
Es lo típico. Un buen espacio, un área tranquila y segura. Ya está.
O sea, quieres lo más costoso.
Básicamente, como en todos lados.
Bucaramanga es un buen vividero.
Bucaramanga suena hasta gracioso. Bucaramanga. Estoy comprando. Estoy comprando y este probablemente es mi último trade del día, de la semana, del mes, del año.
De la vida.
Uy, no. ¿Cómo así? Déjame seguir operando un poquito. Acabo de poner un buy stop encima de la mecha. Por si acaso. Ay, no, se retrocedió muy feo. 10 pips.
¿Qué andará diciendo el otro?
Ahí estamos otra vez. It gain. Le voy a dar espacio hasta esta mecha. Un buen espacio. No traigo tanto riesgo tampoco, entonces le puedo dar un poquito de espacio. GJ también se está moviendo, sí. GBP USD.
DJ también va a romper.
Vamos, Soro. ¿Qué pasa? GBP ya lo hizo.
Vamos, Goldie. El oro. Vamos a levantar las manitas. Hoy es día de manitas porque nos merecemos profits. Y nada más de ese. Hoy es día de manitas.
Manos arriba.
Hoy es el día. Vamos a ayudarle al oro. Uy. No, pero. Vamos. Está fuerte.
Cerró 15.
Cerró 15. Es cierto, 15 cerró y no cerró mal, 15. Acabo de cerrar. Uy, cerré como por acá 15 pips más o menos. 15 pips más o menos. Quiere seguir cayendo. ¿Qué ir a hacer? Está Jerome Powell testifies before Senate Banking Committee.
Sí, está hablando Powell.
Está hablando Powell.
¿Se te olvidó?
No. De hecho no. Rayos. ¿Qué irá a pasar?
Que Bitcoin se va a cero.
¿Qué irá a pasar? ¿Qué Bitcoin se va a hacer? Está fuerte, está fuerte.
Anda asustada la gente. La gente anda asustada.
Tam, 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 tam. Nice. Vamos a ver, Powell testifies. Vamos a buscarlo, Powell testifies. Powell testifies. A ver.
I will review the current economic situation before turning to monetary policy.
Ah, no.
Inflation remains well above our longer-run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ended in April, total PCE prices, that's personal consumption expenditures prices, rose 6.3%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.9%. The available data for May suggests that the core measure likely held at
Continúa going up
slightly last month. Aggregate demand is strong, supply constraints have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated, and price pressures have spread to a broad range of goods. The surge in prices of crude oil and other commodities that resulted from Russia's invasion of Ukraine is boosting gasoline and fuel and is creating additional upward pressure on inflation. And COVID-19 related lockdowns in China are likely to exacerbate ongoing supply chain disruptions. Over the past year, inflation also increased rapidly in many foreign economies, as discussed in a box in the June Monetary Policy Report. Overall economic activity edged down in the first quarter as unusually sharp swings in inventories and net exports more than offset continued strong underlying demand. Recent indicators suggest that real GDP growth has picked up this quarter. Prices of crude oil and other commodities that resulted from Russia's invasion of Ukraine is boosting prices for gasoline and fuel and is creating additional upward pressure, higher mortgage rates. The tightening in financial conditions that we've seen in recent months should continue to temper growth and help bring demand into better balance with supply. The labor market has remained extremely tight, with the unemployment rate near a 50-year low, job vacancies at historical highs, and wage growth elevated. Over the past 3 months, employment rose by an average of 408,000 jobs per month, down from the average pace seen earlier in the year, but still robust. Improvements in labor market conditions have been widespread, including for workers at the lower end of the wage distribution, as well as for African Americans and Hispanics. A box in the June Monetary Policy Report discusses developments in employment and earnings across all major demographic groups. Labor demand is very strong, while labor supply remains subdued, with the labor force participation rate little changed since January. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation poses significant hardship, especially on those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we're strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. Against the backdrop of the rapidly evolving economic environment, our policy has been adapting, and it will continue to do so. With inflation well above our longer-run goal of 2% and an extremely tight labor market, we raised the target range for the federal funds rate at each of our past 3 meetings, resulting in a 1.5 percentage point increase in the target range so far this year. The committee reiterated that it anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range will be appropriate. In May, we announced plans for reducing the size of our balance sheet, and shortly thereafter began the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. Financial conditions have been tightening since last fall and have now tightened significantly, reflecting both policy actions that we have already taken, as well as anticipated actions. Over coming months, we'll be looking for compelling evidence that inflation is moving down, consistent with inflation returning to 2%. We anticipate that ongoing rate increases will be appropriate. The pace of those changes will continue to depend on the incoming data and the evolving outlook for the economy. We will make our decisions meeting by meeting, and will continue to communicate our thinking as clearly as possible. Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Making appropriate monetary policy in this uncertain environment requires a recognition that the economy often evolves in unexpected ways. Inflation has obviously surprised to the upside over the past year, and further surprises could be in store. We therefore will need to be nimble in responding to incoming data and the evolving outlook. And we will strive to avoid adding uncertainty in what is already an extraordinarily challenging and uncertain time. We are highly attentive to inflation risks and determined to take the measures necessary to restore price stability. The American economy is very strong and well-positioned to handle tighter monetary policy. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
On that questions.
On behalf of Chairman Brown, recognize Senator Warren.
Thank you, Acting Chairman. I appreciate the help of the Chairman this morning. And thank you for being with us, Chair Powell. So Americans are struggling with rising costs, and all eyes turn to the Fed. Last week, you announced that the Fed would raise rates by 0.75 percentage point, the biggest increase in nearly 30 years. So let's talk about what the Fed is and isn't doing when it raises interest rates to try to bring down inflation. Let's start with gas prices. The price of gas is up 40% since Russia invaded.
Ahora sí,
will gas prices go down as a result of your interest rate increase?
I would not think so, no.
Mi niño.
That matters because gas prices are one of the single biggest
mírame
drivers
eso,
of
mírame
inflation. Energy prices
Vamos,
overall
Powell.
drove a third of
Dale
inflation last
dale
month.
mierdas que los jugadores con
But
el
the Fed's
precio.
tools, as you say, have no impact here. So
¿Será
let's
que se
look at
impulsa más
another
de
necessity,
50 pi?
food.
¿Qué
Price of
dicen?
groceries is up nearly 12%
Pues,
this
de su
year.
experiencia.
Americans feel the pinch, no matter how much groceries cost. People
Sí, en
still
esa
gotta
gorra.
eat. Chair Powell, will the Fed's interest rate increases bring food prices down for families?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay. So a Fed increase won't bring down these prices. And why? Because rate hikes won't make Vladimir Putin turn his tanks around and leave Ukraine. Rate hikes won't break up monopolies. Rate hikes won't straighten out the supply chain or speed up ships or stop a virus that is still causing lockdowns in some parts of the world. So let's talk about what interest rate increases can do. Chair Powell, you said last week that interest rate increases, quote, moderate demand. Can you just explain a little more about what that means?
Sure. So we think about interest rate increases as affecting financial conditions and then the economy through 3 broad channels, the first of which is interest-sensitive spending. So that's durable goods and automobiles and things like that. So interest rates go up, people's demand for as a result of higher interest rates will moderate or decline so that supply and demand can get into better balance. The second channel is just asset prices generally. Interest rates, as they go up, will cause asset prices to moderate across the economy, and people spend a little bit less out of their lower level of wealth. The third channel is the exchange rate, which is really just another asset price, and that just basically as the dollar strengthens, as rates go up, the dollar would strengthen, which would tend to drive.
So I appreciate this, and I do appreciate the explanation, but let me just see if I can just put a little more plain vanilla explanation of what's going on here. If I understand what you've said and what economists are saying across the board is that when you raise interest rates, there's going to be less money to invest, and that is, it's going to dampen business investment. Is that a fair statement?
I think the idea is to
Makes it more expensive
moderate demand
to invest,
so that it can be in better balance with
Okay.
supply. And
So
the current
it's gonna make it
situation,
more-
demand is well in excess of supply in some areas of our.
more expensive to invest, which in turn is going to throw workers out of work. And when they're out of work, they have less money to spend. So I get that rate increases stop companies from spending money to build new plants or to buy new trucks or to hire new people. Right, Chair Powell? When money's more expensive, they're less inclined to do that. I think that's what you just said on asset pricing, right?
Well, in the labor market, you have, as you know, you have a situation where there's a shortage of workers, and there are two job vacancies for every person who's actively looking for work. So part of this is to get the labor market back into balance.
Well, I appreciate you call it back into balance. What I'm trying to get at, though, is what does the tool of raising rates do? And part of what you just said is that it increases, in effect, the cost to invest, to buy those trucks or new plants or to hire new people. The reason I raise this and the reason I'm so concerned about this is rate increases make it more likely that companies will fire people and slash hours to shrink wage costs. Rate increases also make it more expensive for families to do things like borrow money for a house. And so far, the cost this year of a mortgage has already doubled. Inflation is like an illness, and the medicine needs to be tailored to the specific problem. Otherwise, you could make things a lot worse. And right now, the Fed has no control over the main drivers of rising prices, but the Fed can slow demand by getting a lot of people fired and making families poorer. And while President Biden is working to increase energy supplies and straighten out supply chain kinks and break up monopolies and bring down prices, you could actually tip this economy into recession. So I just want to say, you know what's worse than high inflation and low unemployment? It's high inflation and a recession with millions of people out of work. And I hope you'll reconsider that as you before you drive this economy off a cliff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. On behalf of Chairman Brown, Senator Tillis, please.
Senator Reid, I'm going to defer and allow Senator Shelby to go before me and I'll follow in turn.
Quite all right, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, earlier this month, Secretary Yellen acknowledged she was wrong about the risk of inflation. Previously, you also acknowledged that the Fed got it wrong
Ese señor tiene muchos años.
would be transitory. Yet myself and other members of the committee here have been warning about inflation for over a year. Last July, nearly 1 year ago, when you came before this committee, I raised my concerns about the risk of rising inflation, particularly following the enactment of a $2 trillion spending bill.
Billions and 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 billions, billions and billions and billions.
I discussed the year-to-year price increases on agricultural goods such as corn, wheat, and soybeans at that time. I pointed out the rising cost of metals, including copper and aluminum. I mentioned the increase in energy prices, used cars, and airline tickets. As someone who remembers, and I do from this committee, encountering high inflation during the 70s, I warned that many of the same conditions present then, such as loose monetary policy and significant government spending, were occurring again, among other things. My main concern last year was that the Federal Reserve would fail to address rising inflation before it was too late.
Inflation,
later, this concern
and
has come to fruition. And as we sit here today, inflation is
la gente está más asustada por eso.
40-year high.
Bitcoin a cero.
$5 a gallon. And we're currently in the midst of 12 consecutive months of inflation above 5%, including spiking to 8.6 last month. Ultimately, Mr. Chairman, as inflation continues to run rampant, I believe the Federal Reserve and this administration failed the American people by not heeding these warnings a year ago and by not acting soon to address it.
¿De quién?
We're where we are today, I know that.
¿Sabe la noticia?
The consequences of being wrong on inflation are now being
Pues
felt.
hay que esperar que hable Powell porque no está hablando. Lo están cuestionando.
And despite the recent decision to raise interest rates, the Federal Reserve still has a long way to go to get inflation under control. What can we expect in the future from the Federal Reserve? And I know you don't have total control over inflation, but you have a lot of.
Va a hablar otra vez Powell. Ahí viene.
To bring this under control.
Y viene Powell, señores.
So, financial conditions, of course, have tightened and have priced in
Pobre hombre, no quisiera ser Powell.
A string of additional rate increases, and that's appropriate. Well, as you pointed out, and as Senator Tillis pointed out as well, our policy rate is only at 1.6%, but all out the curve, the market is pricing in increases. So financial conditions have already priced in additional rate increases. But we need to go ahead and have them, and I think that the most recent inflation indicators of various kinds suggest to us that we needed to accelerate the pace at which we get up to a level that is neutral, that is close to the longer run neutral level, and then we can make an assessment of how much further and faster to go. And so that's what we're doing. I think you can see from the moves we're making now that we do understand the full scope of the problem, and we're using our tools to address it pretty vigorously now.
Mr. Chairman, explain to us again how important one of your mandates is price stability. How important price stability is to all Americans.
So price stability is really the bedrock of the economy in this sense, in the sense that you really cannot have a sustained period of maximum employment, our other co-equal goal. You can't have that without price stability. And so we must restore price stability, and we will. We have the tools and the resolve and hopefully the judgment to accomplish that task. It's essential that we do.
What's your next step?
Well, if you look at the market has been I think reading our reaction function reasonably well, and I think what you will see is continued progress toward expeditious progress toward higher rates. I'll say this: the committee, the center of the committee wrote down that rates would be between 3 and 3.5% by the end of this year, as of a few weeks ago.
Is this
3%? Escuché.
Is this Federal Reserve Board of Governors under your leadership committed, as Dr. Volcker was some 40 years ago, to bringing inflation under control no matter what?
I would never want to try to compare myself to Paul Volcker in any way, but I will say that we are strongly committed to restoring price stability. We do understand that it is the thing that we need so that we can get back to the kind of labor market that we all want.
But reaching the standard that Volcker left at the Fed would be a high reach, but one that anybody there should try to get there, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shelby. I'll exercise my time now. Mr. Chairman, you point out in your testimony that the core
Mr. Jerome Powell
minus gas, food, and rent, 4.9%, and even slightly declined from the previous report. So that leaves the real culprits, gas, food, and rent. First, the issue of gas price inflation is a global phenomenon. Is that correct?
Yes, gas prices are a function of oil prices to a significant extent, and then the refining spread as well.
Right, and that's has been exacerbated by the Ukraine invasion. We've deliberately, and the Europeans have deliberately cut off accessing Russian supplies, and that's added to inflation. And the other problem also with hydrocarbons, it's a cartel that sets the price. Is that accurate?
Sorry, what's a cartel?
It's a cartel that sets the price of oil worldwide.
Yes, globally, that cartel has a very major impact on the price of oil.
And they have decided that further production is not as lucrative to them as just sitting back and making money. That's what it appears like. With respect to food, there are multiple factors there also. One is climate. We've seen loss of arable land. We've seen a lot of factors. All of this is outside the purview of the Federal Reserve, but I think it's helpful to understand what are driving forces in these price increases. Transportation issues with respect to food, that's a function of higher diesel costs, a function of lack of drivers. Again, the Ukraine, a significant amount of wheat is not being exported from Ukraine or from Russia, as well as fertilizers. That's driving the price. And then the rental, affordable housing issue, that has been a crisis since I became a congressman in 1990. I recall marching in Washington for affordable housing in 1990. We just don't have enough, and that, I think, is a factor, too. Are those the major causes for these increases in prices?
Those are some of the major ones. You could also point to some parts of the goods economy, which have been restrained capacity, and you're actually seeing significant price increases in some of the service economy as it really reopens fully now, and that would be the travel and leisure sector.
There's another issue, too. We talked about the cartels that dominate hydrocarbons, but we found, for example, during the pandemic, that there are really just 4 major meat processors in the United States. And with 4, rather than a multiple of that, there is the ability to indirectly restrain supply and increase prices. In fact, some of my colleagues, particularly in the House, have been talking about the antitrust aspects of some of these price increases. Is that a plausible ingredient to the problem, too?
So I think that's really a matter for the competition authorities, not for us. But sure, I think broadly speaking, our economy is very competitive. There will be some industries where that's less so the case.
So these range of you have to take action, and your basically tool is interest rates and going in and out of buying public securities. But we have a lot of work to do, too, which is to try to resolve some of these issues, and we have to do it in order to assist your efforts, the fiscal policy and other policy. I was very pleased to see the President sign the legislation with respect to shipping reform. That's a step, but we have to do much more, too. Is that accurate?
I think that's really a question for you. We're very focused on sticking to our knitting and carrying out the task that we've been assigned.
No, I appreciate that, and the independence of the Fed is something that has to be protected by everyone, including particularly yourself. A final sort of issue that I'm thinking of, we're at a tremendous, I think, turning point in our economy. Factors that 10, 15 years ago were not active, things like social media, et cetera. But one other factor, too, with respect to hydrocarbons is perhaps the companies are either unconsciously or consciously limiting investment because they're anticipating an electrified power supply, electric cars, electric everything. Is that something that the Fed is looking at?
I think that is certainly, if you pick up the annual report of any of the big oil companies, you'll see that is something that is happening, and it's a rational economic response to expectations about where future policy is headed.
No, I think there are so many factors here, but I think it's good to get some of them on the table. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. With that, let me recognize Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Again, Chair Powell, thank you for being here. By the Fed's own analysis of various policy rules, including the Taylor Rule, the revised Taylor Rule, the Balanced Approach Rule, and the Balanced Approach Shortfall Rule, rates should have begun to rise long before they did. According to the Fed's own analysis of these rules, the Fed's fund rate should currently be above 6%. This is in a report to Congress. Yet the rate currently stands at 1.6%. Likewise, these same rules should have prompted the Fed to begin raising rates Q4 last year, Q1 this year. I'm concerned that the Fed has opted out of rules-based to discretionary monetary policy. As the Fed reviews monetary policy strategy, Chair Powell, will you commit to considering an increased weight for a rules-based strategy in Fed decision-making, and if not, why?
So we do use policy rules like the various forms of the Taylor rule in all of the analysis that we do. If you're thinking about how monetary policy will affect the economy, you have to have some sort of a rule like that. Fed has never really used them in a prominent way to actually set policy in real time. But that's not to say they don't shed light, and we do consult them. We consult them on an ongoing basis. The rules called for deeply, deeply negative rates during the pandemic, and we didn't do that. They did call, of course, for rates to move up, and rates now really are moving up much closer to where the Taylor rule, various forms of the Taylor rule are, and I think by the end of the year we'll be pretty close to where some of the Taylor rule iterations are. So it's something that we consider. I think in a couple of years when we look at our framework again, that's something we could look at.
And Chair Powell, could you just briefly explain the variance between rules-based decision-making being at 6 and where we are today? What other factors came into play?
So what Taylor rules don't take into consideration changes in financial conditions. They just look at the overnight policy rate. As I mentioned earlier, we began signaling, and the way we're set up now to signal policy changes going forward with the summary of economic projections that we do 4 times a year. So markets priced that in, and you're getting a lot of policy tightening well in advance of actually raising rates. As you pointed out, we're at 1.6% only on the federal funds rate, but look out the rate curve. All the very substantial additional rate hikes are already priced in, and they're affecting financial conditions, and they have been for several months. So that's one way of thinking about it. It's really only at the very short end of the curve where rates are still in negative territory from a real perspective. If you look farther out, real rates are positive right across the curve, and that's really what you're trying to achieve with policy in a situation like this where we have 40-year highs in inflation, and we know we need to have restrictive policy, and that's where we're headed.
Thank you. In 2012, the Fed adopted its current 2% inflation target, then amended this in 2020 to allow inflation to run over 2% target so that inflation averages 2% over time. Many warned this approach would simply give inflation a foothold before the Fed could respond. Now inflation's at 6.5% per year, and many serious analysts are predicting a recession. According to the Fed's framework, will the Fed push inflation below 2% so that it averages 2% over time?
No, that wasn't the way the framework worked. And I should clarify, though, the framework was carefully focused on what we knew, which was the economy of the last 25 years. The pandemic hit a few months afterward, and I think we've been aware since reasonably quickly after that the disinflationary forces of the last quarter century have been replaced, at least temporarily, by a whole different set of forces, and those are the forces that our policy has been reacting and dealing with, and we're well aware of that. I think that what we were looking at was a world in which you didn't see inflation move up even when unemployment was for an extended period well below 4%. This is a different economy, different forces. The real question is, how long will this new set of forces be sustained? And we can't know that. But in the meantime, our job is to find price stability and maximum employment in this new economy.
And final question is, there is some renewed discussions about increased spending and increased taxes through reconciliation. Just hypothetically, if Congress were to pass a bill that increased spending by $500 billion or $1 trillion and raise taxes, would that make your job easier or more difficult?
I swore off getting involved in these fiscal debates a year or so ago, and I'm determined to see if I can't stick to that. But remember, we can always incorporate. What we do is we take fiscal policy as given, and we react appropriately.
Well, then maybe instead of policy working through Congress, but policy that was passed by Congress, do you believe that the $1.9 trillion spending package last year had any effect on inflation?
It's really not our job to, pass judgment. We didn't pass judgment on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act or the CARES Act or that act as well, the ARP. So I really think that's a job for Congressional Budget Office.
Thank you, Chairman Powell.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Ron Paul. Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto of Nevada is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here. Let me start with high prices. Because not only in Nevada but across the country we're seeing high food, housing, and gas prices, which really is creating a financial hardship for too many families. And I want to start with gas prices first. In Nevada, average price of gas is $5.60. In Las Vegas, about $5.60. In Reno, at $6 a gallon. And as gas prices rise across the country, oil and gas companies, we know, are making record profits, but are using that money to continue to consolidate their industry and pay for stock buybacks instead of investing in increased oil production. On one of them, and one I've heard, is over 9,000 permits that they have that are unused drilling permits, or they're not expanding their refining capacity. We also know that reduced refining capacity is a particular problem that has been caused in large part by decades of oil industry consolidation and is driving gas price hikes to be as much as 61 cents a gallon higher than expected. So when considering the drivers of inflation, how much do Federal Reserve economists consider consolidation in an industry? And what else can we do to hold these industries accountable for their contributions to rising prices?
So those are really questions for the competition authorities, questions of industry structure and consolidation. They really aren't questions that we directly address. We raise interest rates, and our job is maximum employment.
But I have to push back. You have to consider that. I mean, you're considering what's happening in Ukraine as a variable on inflation and high prices. So you have to consider the fact that we have these oil companies. They are exclusively control this commodity that is key for this country. We know that not only do they produce and decide how and when they're going to drill crude oil, we also know the refineries, and quite honestly, the refineries in this country are not prepared to refine the domestic oil that even comes from Texas and the Dakotas. The refineries are prepared to refine the oil that comes from out of this country. And we also know that many of the oil companies have their own traders that are trading on the price of crude oil in this country. I mean, listen, you just talked about an outside agency. This is why this is so important and why I am co-sponsor of the Transportation Fuel Market Transparency Act. Glencore was just fined $1.1 billion because they were manipulating the fuel oil prices to their benefit. So that is something you have to take into consideration when we have an industry like these gas and oil companies that are so consolidated. They are having an impact on the prices to the detriment of the people in my state. So that has to be something you consider and take into consideration when you're looking at the impact that people across the country are seeing from these high prices. I hope it is. Please tell me you are.
Well, I think we see that the global oil prices, which have very important effects on gas prices here at home, are set on the global market, and that, as we mentioned earlier, there's a large cartel that is responsible to a significant extent for setting those prices. We take that as given.
So do you pay attention to what Wall Street is saying and what these cartels are doing? When you say cartels, these are these big oil companies, and they're indicating that, well, I'm not going to drill because I'm making profits because the price of gas is so high. So you would assume, I would hope that you would take that into consideration, that it's going to continue these high prices because there is a challenge in holding these oil companies accountable.
So in principle, we pay attention to anything that could affect the use of our tools and the need to use our tools. And I think with the future price of oil, the best thing you can probably do is look at oil futures, because that futures in theory should be taking into account all of these factors, and that's what we do. But ultimately, the question for us is, do we raise or lower interest rates? We don't have tools that would address these practices that you're discussing. They're not really, of course, we understand them.
Well, do you have concerns that these oil companies are manipulating or controlling the prices that we have right now? Do you take that into consideration with the tools that you need to reduce inflation and reduce these costs?
Honestly, those are not judgments for us to make. The questions about industry structure and competition are really not. It's not our assignment. Our assignment is maximum employment and price stability.
The outcome of that infrastructure is something you've got to take into consideration.
Yes.
Unless they change, the prices are not coming down.
Lo regaña.
Unless they stop getting profits and sharing that with their shareholders and start addressing and looking at actually the consumer at the other end of this, who is bearing the brunt of it, these prices are not going to come down. I would assume you take that into consideration. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, when you say take it into consideration, we do have to have a forecast of oil prices, and we do. But ultimately, though, the question for us is price inflation. What's happening with price inflation? And it's a macroeconomic question. It's not a question about industry structure or corporate behavior. It's a question about what will be the behavior of inflation across the economy. And in particular, there's really not anything that we can do about oil prices. There's a little, food prices is a bit more mixed, but for oil prices, they're set at the global level. It has to do with global oil prices and also the refining spread. Neither of these are things that we have the tools to affect.
Does it concern you that these oil companies haven't come to the table to look for a solution to help us reduce fuel costs?
I don't think it's appropriate for the Fed or for me to be reaching out into areas of policy that are not assigned to us. It's not up to us to comment on that sort of thing. We have a very specific job and precious independence to carry that job out, and I think the other side of that is stick to that job. And our job is maximum employment and price stability.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My time is up.
Thanks, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Rounds from South Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, welcome again. It seems as though for the last couple of times that we've had you in front of this committee, inflation has been a primary item of discussion. I want to follow up just as my colleagues have, and I'd like to take it in a little bit different path, perhaps, because when it comes to breaking down the different causes of inflation, clearly there is the supply side and the demand side. And the reality is that a large portion of the inflation stems from the higher energy prices, which is part of the supply side issue. When President Biden took office, January of 2021 through January of 2022, the price of unleaded gas has increased by 50% during that time period, from $2.33 to about $3.30 per gallon. Now, that was well before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Higher prices are instead, I believe, a direct result of policy decisions made by the Biden administration, like prohibiting new oil and gas leases on public lands and waters and choking off future access through the Keystone XL pipeline and increasing U.S. dependence on foreign energy sources by actively calling on OPEC to produce more oil. All of these seem to send a terrible message to the market about the future of investing in oil and gas processes within the United States. At the same time, Mr. Chairman, your tools are designed, as we've discussed in the past, to impact not necessarily the supply side, but the demand side of inflation. So if you attempt to use your tools that are available at this time to address what I believe to be the policy-induced side of inflation, do you risk hurting the economy by using these interest rate increases when, in effect, as you've indicated earlier here in this meeting, that you really can't impact the price of gas or the price of food?
So I think that's right. We know that our tools can't affect certain aspects of inflation, and that would include certainly energy inflation and food inflation. So nonetheless, our statutory goal is headline inflation. But we also know that core inflation is actually a better indicator of headline inflation.
A better indicator
than headline inflation itself is, because food and energy tend to be quite volatile. They tend to move up and move down, and that's been the history. So core enables us to look through that volatility, and so we focus very much on that as a better representation of what underlying inflation of the economy is at any given time.
And I think But in this particular case, that core inflation, if we're not going to include some of those, what I think earlier we thought would be transitory in nature portions of inflation, they have proven not to be transitory. In fact, South Dakotans are now paying $682 more per month on goods and services than they were when President Biden took office due to inflation. The administration is claiming the Federal Reserve can fix our inflation problem. But as you've just indicated, you focus on core, and your tools might very well work on core, but not on those really heavy drivers to inflation that South Dakotans are seeing like the rest of the country. See, Mr. Chairman, what I believe is going to happen here, and I just share this, clearly you are aware that you're going to be the person that takes the fall if inflation is not brought under control. And this administration is going to point to you and to the Federal Reserve saying, you have the tools to fix inflation and you're not doing your job. When, in essence, the portion of inflation which Americans are feeling today may not just be the core inflation that some of your tools do, but the total cost of inflation that my citizens in South Dakota feel to the tune of, well, $682 more per month in living expenses than what they were when this administration took office.
So we're focused on the part of it that we can address, and that is there's a job to do on demand here. There are parts of the economy where demand exceeds supply, and that's where we think our tools can help, and that's what we're focused on.
Very good. Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, another item. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision issued a press release indicating that it had made substantive technical changes to the calculation of the GSIB score for EU-based global systemically important banks, the GSIBs. Do you, the Federal Reserve as being a part of this organization, do you believe right now that this change reflects the views of the Federal Reserve as an influential member of the Basel Committee? Apparently, it looks like this may very well provide some advantages to our European banks over U.S. banks based upon this reassessment of how they view risk within the EU community.
So my understanding of that is that it's really about supervisors being able to use discretion about transactions that go across national lines within the European Union.
Yeah.
It doesn't apply at all here, and ultimately the capital rules that Europeans apply are decided by Europeans, not by us.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Warner from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Powell, it's good to see you again. Thank you for your service to our country. I want to go a couple of different directions. First, and I think some colleagues have already raised this, but the truth is what we're grappling with right now on inflation is clearly a global phenomenon. I think even the Cato Institute, group that doesn't always necessarily agree with folks on my sides of the aisle, have pointed out inflation in many industrial countries around the world is running at the same rates, if not higher. As I frankly just returned from a bipartisan trip to Finland, Latvia, and Turkey, getting back late last night. I'm still a little bit jet lagged. In Turkey, I think inflation's running at 78% a year. Finland gas prices were at $9 a gallon, and I asked one of my dear Republican colleagues, you know, it's amazing. Joe Biden's inflation hitting here in Finland, too. The point being that a lot of these effects are not due to any single country's activities, but it is a global effect. I think colleagues have already acknowledged the effect that the Russia-Ukraine war has, some of the disruption on supply chains. What I don't think has been fully addressed yet is some of the challenges that are coming around from China in terms of their zero COVID policy, a lockdown on Shanghai for literally months on end, and how that supply chain disruption is floating through the whole global economy. Can you speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. So, of course, you're right. Inflation is very much a global phenomenon. If you look at comparable large advanced economies like ours, you'll see inflation rates that are quite similar to ours, in some cases higher, some cases lower. But there are important differences in the characteristics of that inflation. Ours is more about demand, I would say, than most of the others, and theirs is more about energy prices and things like that. In terms of your question on China, we don't think we've seen the full effect of the lockdowns that we've had, but we'll expect to be seeing some negative effects on bottlenecks. On the other hand, China now seems to be coming out of that period of lockdown, and growth seems to be picking up. Advanced indicators are that their economy may be recovering. But of course, the zero COVID policy, as long as it's in place, it certainly could. You could certainly have a relapse given this highly contagious disease.
Let me and again, we're all looking for.
Bueno, esto se va a demorar ahí.
Frankly, I'm glad that the president. I know, particularly some folks on my side of the aisle are concerned about the president visiting Saudi Arabia and visiting.
Eso se va a demorar. Sí, van a cuestionar ahí. Probablemente van a seguir ahí con Powell. Probabilidades de que se desarrolle. Vamos a ver, pues le ha dado vueltas, pero pues no ha sido algo novedoso, sino simplemente aclarando las cosas que ya se ha hecho previamente. Entonces, tengan cuidado.
De todas maneras, he estado viendo, mañana también habla, no me había dado cuenta.
Sí, eso vi.
Joder. Semana lenta.
Sí, sí, la verdad es que sí. Ya les muestro por acá. Sí, bien lento. Bien lento. Pues no tan fácil, mucho fake out. Hoy hubo mucho fake out. Mucho fake out. Por ahora yo termino de esta manera. Recuperé con la comprita de oro arriba. Break even básicamente. Sergio, muy buen trabajo. Y edificio Alexander, sí, suavecito, muy bien Camilo. Santiago, muy bien. Manejo de riesgo, suavecito. Muy bien. Suavecito. Dani, muy fuerte, tiene que relajarse, Dani. Está operando por operar. Mucho cuidado, Mayela, buen trabajo. Luis. Buen trabajo, amigo mío. Iván, buen trabajo. Por ahí me imagino recuperando una prueba de fondeo. Cuídense mucho, cuiden su dinero, no sobreoperen, no sobrepalanquen y nos vemos mañana. Está durito. Saluditos.
Chao, tío.
But the notion of investment in a key industry component like semiconductors, long term in terms of keeping inflationary pressures down, right move or not?
Again, I wouldn't, as you say, I wouldn't comment on a specific legislative proposal.
Talk about the industry sector.
I'll just say that I do think we learned a lot about global supply chains, and we're still learning, and it's important to take the right lessons, and I think it's an important area to explore about how we can harden up and improve our sourcing capabilities, including what should be here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Warner. Senator Kennedy from Louisiana is recognized.